Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session on creating tools for change making. It's more than just duct tape. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, more than just duct tape? What is more than just duct tape? And while we can all agree that duct tape is amazing, I think we can also think about situations where it's not exactly what we're looking for. So that's what we're going to discuss today is really thinking about what is there beyond duct tape? So to get us started, I want us to think about what mission looks like in practice. So we have a little cartoon here. It says, "Welcome to Quantum Corp." Our mission. Who are we trying to kid? It's just one day at a time around here with a little asterisk that says it replaces all previous mission statements subject to change without notice. And this is what we're trying to avoid. We can talk a lot about the role of a mission, but a mission, as we should understand, guides our organization, guides our school, really shows us what we are doing on a daily basis. So we don't want to take it one day at a time. We don't want our mission statement to be changing all the time. We want it to be very, very clear. And then we want our mission statement and our practice to be in alignment. And then when we think about change, I want to be very clear here that we don't only need to change when things are bad or something is broken or wrong. What are some other reasons we might want to change? When I think about why change, I can think of lots of different reasons. We have different students every year, so they might need a change. We have different faculty every year, different parents. We might have a change in resources. Maybe we have a change in our funding, a change in our location, a change in our schedule. Some of these things are in our control, some of these things are not in our control. Also, in our ongoing pursuit of excellence, one of those aspects is continuous change to try to always be better and always make things a little bit better. Just because something's good doesn't mean that we might would not want to change it. We might want to strive for going for great. So there's a lot of different reasons we might want to change. In this session, we're going to talk a little bit about how change is constant, that we want to focus on intentional practice stemming from the mission. That's part of excellence. And we're going to talk about the how and the what of change today, not the why. We will discuss different tools that we can use and ways that you can be a change agent. So as we get started, I want you to think about what is one change that you wish you could make at your school. This could be big, this could be small, just something to keep in mind as we go through this session. And as we think about that change, we want to start with a blueprint. And our blueprint is going to really outline for us what are we trying to accomplish? Why does it matter? What does success look like? Because before we build it, we need to know what we're building. It doesn't have to be a full redo. We don't have to be thinking about, knocking over a house and starting a new house. We could be, redoing the bathroom, changing out the backsplash in the kitchen. No matter how big or small our change is, we do start with that blueprint. And this blueprint helps us with shifting from this idea to the reality. So we're going to talk about three different steps in create our blueprint. The first is to clarify the vision. The second is to identify the priorities and the markers of success. And the third is to map roles. And all of those go into our blueprint. So this first step, clarify the vision. We need to have a really good understanding of what are we trying to accomplish before we just start making change. So when we think about this, some questions for us to be considering. What is the core challenge or improvement you want to see in your school or community? How does this change connect to the mission of your school? Remember, we're always trying to connect it back to the mission. Who benefits most from this change? Students, faculty, families, the community. And how will we know we're staying true to the mission as we move forward? These are all really important questions for us to consider as we clarify that vision for our change. Step two is to identify priorities and markers of success. So some questions for us to think about here. What outcomes do we want to achieve in the next 6 to 12 months? What does success look like in a measurable or observable way? What would failure look like, or what pitfalls do we want to avoid? How do we want people to feel, say, or do differently as a result of this change? So we need to be really clear on how will we know we've done a good job? How will we know that created the change that we have set out to make? This is very much connected to that clarifying the vision. This is just that next step of how do we know we've gotten there and what are we really trying to accomplish? And then step three is mapping the roles. Who are the key players? who need to be involved inside and outside, what permits do we need to get, what resources like time, money, skills, relationships will we need, who holds formal or informal power to advance or block this change, how can we build the right coalition or team to move this forward. We really want to think about the process here and really getting all the right people on board and thinking about who we want to involve in what ways and making sure they're all included in that blueprint. So, like we mentioned, these are the three steps to first we start with clarifying the vision, then we identify priorities and markers of success, then we map our roles, and that is what brings us to our blueprint. This blueprint, like we mentioned, will give us a clear understanding of the change that we're trying to make, what it looks like, how we know that we're doing it, that we've gotten there, and who all is going to be involved. So now what? We have the blueprint, but we want to turn it into the actual change. You see here my blueprint of my house. We want to make it an actual house. So, like we said, now what? How do we get there? So we want to think here about what is in our toolbox and when we might use each tool. And I've shown here some different examples of a toolbox and some ways that we might use it. We see a hammer. A hammer might be good for driving ideas forward, like when we need to take decisive action. We see a saw that could be used for cutting through obstacles. What's holding back progress? How do we remove those barriers? We see some pliers. This could be for making adjustments, maybe using some needle nose pliers for some more fine adjustments, but where are those small tweaks that can create a big impact? We see a tape measure where we can assess the scale and the scope. How do we know that the change is realistic and attainable? We see a level. This can ensure balance and alignment. And thinking about, are our changes sustainable and aligned with the school's mission? We see screws. Oh, sorry about that. We see screws and nails. And we want to think about what are the long-term supports needed to change. And then we see our duct tape. And this could be, in my mind, more for those temporary fix. When do we need a stopgap solution between a long-term one? We all know that the benefit of duct tape is that it does almost anything you need right away, but it doesn't last forever. It's not always the prettiest solution. So just want to think for a minute about when you might use each of these tools. And one thing that we want to keep in mind is that's really important is to think about using these very intentionally. We have the tape measure on here. One of the things that we want to think about is measure twice, cut once. So just keeping that in mind about what are those changes and what are those levers of change that you're using that can be undone versus can't be undone, and where do we have to be especially intentional? So when we think about this, we just want to take a minute to think about which of these tools have you used? When have you used them in your change making experiences? How have you used them? What tools might be missing from this toolbox? Would you include a mirror for reflection, a compass to help guide you, a wrecking ball to just knock it all over and start over again? And think about some different changes. There's some scenarios that we've included here that you could also use to review and think about where you would use different tools in there. And then also think about what tools are missing from your own toolbox, not just in this toolbox, but in your own toolbox. When you think about ways that you create change and that you work on change, what tools might you be missing? So, as a reflection, would love for you also to think about, are there unexpected tools you've realized you've used or are missing? Do you use a wrecking ball when you maybe shouldn't? Are you missing that mirror for reflection? There's no super glue on here. Maybe super glue is a tool that you really need. Maybe super glue is more your style instead of duct tape. In my house, we're really big believers in Gorilla Glue. Which tool from someone else's experience made you think differently as you think about other people's change experiences? And when you think about other people as leaders, are there tools that they use a lot? Maybe a megaphone. Do they speak really loudly? A walkie-talkie to connect people and foster communication. And then just think about, are there tools that you would want to add to a shared toolbox? You probably work with some sort of team, so think not only about the tools that you have in your toolbox, but the tools that you have as a team and how you're all using it. One of the other pieces that I think is really interesting about this tool metaphor that's been brought up before is that some of these tools, you need to know how to use them properly and make sure to use them. So, for example, we see on here both a wrench and a hammer. Now, you could use a wrench to nail in a nail in a nail, but the hammer is the more effective tool. And so when we're thinking about what we're trying to do, really having command of that right tool and the proper way to use it. I personally don't really know. I mean, I was going to say I don't really know how to use a saw. I think that it's probably pretty self-explanatory, but I've never used a saw like this. So something like that is just not a tool with which I feel comfortable. And is that something that I should become comfortable? Should I learn? Should I train myself? Should I seek support in that? So one of those things that we want to think about is not just what tools we have, but do we know how to use all of the tools? And are we using the tools in the way that they're meant to be used, or really in the most effective way for us to be using them? Another thing to think about is when do we want to call in the experts? I see here I brought in a plumber, a architect, and an electrician. And I mentioned that we are each individuals and we have a team, but there's also times when we might want to bring in somebody from the outside and just bring in somebody with a specific expertise. So the electrician might maybe systematic issues that need rewiring, a plumber when blockages need clearing out to install a workaround, architects when a new vision is needed. So where in your schoolwork would it help to call in an electrician, a plumber, an architect, um, a building inspector? So when we think about that with our schools, there's times when we would want to bring in an outside provider for professional development or consultant to help with strategic planning or a content matter expert to help us build a new curriculum. So just because we can do it all on our own doesn't always mean that it's the best way for us to do it. I think about it in when I think about plumbing issues at my house, for example, I know that there's certain things that I can do. Like I can unblock my kitchen sink when it gets clogged. But when it comes to water flooding my basement, I call the plumber. I don't touch electrician stuff. Electricity scares me, wiring scares me. I don't do that. But I handle all of my lawn maintenance on my own. And some of that is that I feel like I can just YouTube it and find stuff. Some of it is I can go to Home Depot and ask a lot of questions. The electrician piece, the reason I don't want to do it is because I'm worried I'll burn down my house. So when we think about calling in the experts, there's an issue of both our own personal bandwidth and time and when people can do it faster or more efficiently and we can focus on other things. But there's also that issue of where is there risk? And when do you not want to, metaphorically, burn down your house? So now we're going to come back to this idea of who is a change maker. We've talked a lot about change. We've talked about levers of change. And surprise, it's you. You are a change maker. And so when we think about that, consider what is your role in change making? What does that look like? What role do you have? And how do we ensure that change stays aligned with our mission? We started with this as an idea. We've talked a lot about different tools that you can use. But it's really important that we keep in mind that we want that change to stay aligned with our mission. And now, as a final question, would love for you to think about what is one final change or what is one next step that you can use as a change maker? Thank you so much.